Hello everyone, welcome to the Redmen TV. I'm Chris Pajak. This is Josh Williams. Josh is an expert in analysis, whether that be stats or whether that be tactics. And we're going to be looking at Cody Gakpo today. We're going to look at some of his statistics and what that means versus his peers, and what we look at when we see those numbers, what we feel, when we see his numbers. And we're also going to take a look at what he could do for Liverpool side. So we're going to look at some tactical variations that Cody Gakpo gives us, and we're going to look at some systems and stuff, and we're going to discuss today how we think Cody could change Liverpool's side. So we're going to get into it then, Josh. We've both separately looked at Cody Gakpo. What are the things that draw your eye when you look at his stats first and foremost?
Yeah, well, there's lots of different areas I think that'll jump out to me. I think one of the main ones is, and it fits with a bit of a recurring theme lately when it comes to our transfer business, specifically in attacking players, is he seems to be making what I like to call the leap, right? Mm-hmm. In terms of like, he's quite clearly stepping up, like right now in the process of moving on to a new level, I think. Like, for example, last season in the Dutch Eredivisie, he posted 12 goals and 12 assists in about 27 appearances, I think it was. This season, he's already on 9 goals and 12 assists. So he's already equalled his assist total of last season, and he's obviously going to go past his goals total. And if you look back at when Liverpool signed Luis Diaz about a year ago, Diaz was doing the same. I think the previous year he scored about 6 times in the Portuguese top flight. The season that Liverpool signed him, mid-season, he'd already got 14 to his name, I think. And the same goes for Nunes in the summer. He scored about 6 in his debut season at Benfica. Following season, I think he scored about 26. So Liverpool seemed really keen to pick up on these players who were like in the process of going from, I suppose, potential to proven quality and an elite level.
Is that, sorry to interrupt, mate, is that where you think Liverpool are trying to gain their edge in the market, rather than like Klopp picking up a player from Japan, second division, and bringing him over to Dortmund and watching him, achieve there? Do you think now we're like, well, look, we can't really take the risk on potential right now. We need them to be maybe a step ahead of potential, and that is making the leap?
Yeah, well, this is the thing with a lot of people suggest, like, why aren't Liverpool getting Nunes before Benfica get him? Why aren't Liverpool getting Bellingham before Dortmund and things like that? And I understand those concerns, but at the same time, if you think of where Liverpool are in the football and food chain, if you like, they're at the pinnacle. So Liverpool are kind of in a luxurious position where they can let these prospects develop elsewhere. And once they get to a point where they're really, really good, like, comes to Anfield then, and then we just poach them. That's what Real Madrid used to do to us. Barcelona used to do it to us. And now we're in a position to do it to other teams. So I've got no real issue with letting players develop elsewhere, getting to a point where they've ironed out all the cracks, and then Liverpool pay a bit more to bring them to Anfield. And if you look at what Gakpo did even during the World Cup, it was a bit of a coming of age for me. I think he scored certainly the winning goal in the first game, and he scored in all 3 group games. So that's certainly something that stood out to me, how much of a leap he seems to have made this season compared to last season. And there's a few other departments as well. I think his crossing is an obvious element to touch on. He's currently 3rd in the Eredivisie for crosses, which is quite curious considering he's an inside forward, really. He's playing on the left, cutting in with his right, but he's 3rd in the league for crosses. I think that's quite interesting and something that you don't usually see that.
Yeah, the thing is, when I looked at him play, and I looked at all of his assists and all of his goals, and watched a couple of games, I find that, and we'll cover this later when we look at the tactical side of things, his starting position is really good, but he quite often takes the ball off players, like the left fullback, and whips a ball in, like almost the element of surprise. Yeah. Like, and he crosses the ball as an in-swinger quite often into the striker, which I think Liverpool have been sort of crying out for somebody maybe to do something like that at times this season, where you just want them to be brave and put the ball into a good area. But it's his positioning and his position relative to the other players on the pitch, which I think opens up those sort of crossing angles for himself. And it's not something that Luis Diaz does. It's certainly different to him. But it's that ability to go round the outside or inside, I think, with Gakpo that's quite interesting. I mean, he's currently crossing. When we compared him to Sadio Mane, Jota and Luis Diaz, he is nearly 5 times. He's getting more crosses into the penalty area per 90 than those other lads, which is a huge thing, isn't it? And
Yeah,
I think the other thing, sorry, not to stop you there, but and this won't show up in the stats, he's a captain. And Liverpool have had a trait of signing captains from football clubs in the past. Like, there was a spell where there was probably 6 or 7 captains at the football club, and the fact that he was captain in the side at such a young age shows that he's more than just a player and a bit part player. They've entrusted him with almost leading the side before Liverpool poached him.
Yeah, it's definitely an additional element that you can add to a scouting process, picking up on these players who were supposedly like leaders, and I think he was certainly acting as a bit of a talisman for PSV. I think he took set pieces as well, which kind of captures his, his technique on his deliveries, and those crosses that you've just touched on, the way he does it, I think it'll be easier to do on the tactics board, which we're going to do. But he does have a tendency to kind of cut inside to the edge of the box, the corner of the box, and kind of, it's almost like he used a golf club to kind of really delicately chip the ball towards like the back stick.
Yeah.
And it's a really useful attacking weapon that Liverpool don't really have. And it'll add a bit of an element of surprise, I suppose, to Liverpool's game. Another element of his game that I wanted to touch on, which could play into the idea of him being this talisman for PSV, is pass completion is really, really low.
Yeah.
Now, it's obviously the most vanilla stat in the world, pass completion, passing accuracy. It doesn't tend to mean much ever when you look at it. But it is interesting in this case because he completes 65.7% of his passes.
Yeah.
So what that basically means is, when you look at it, when he's on the ball and he's making a pass, he's about 34% likely to find an opposition player with his passes, which is quite weird. And he's in the bottom 7% of the whole of Europe for forwards and attacking midfielders for that, which is a curious quirk, I think.
Yeah, I wonder whether is there something that this is the lad that he's got to play the final ball. I mean, he's also the top assister at the football club. He gets a lot of goals. Is this the guy, we've got to give it to him and he's going to make the killer pass? And is that why his passing percentage is much lower than maybe a Virgil van Dijk who souls through games at 90 to 94% almost week in, week out? Is that something that could lead to that type of statistic, do you think?
Yeah, it's possible. But I think even if you compare him to players who are in this position and players who have a similar role in their team, it's still a really low pass completion. For example, Luis Diaz. When Luis Diaz was at Porto in his final season, you could argue he was the playmaker, the primary weapon, and he was playing on the same flank as Gakpo.
Yeah.
Diaz posted a pass completion of about 80%. Gakpo down at just under 66%. So that's a real jump, and it suggests he gives the ball away a lot, which stems from the fact he's trying things, which is fine, taking risks and things like that. But I think it's interesting considering Núñez loses the ball a lot, Jota loses the ball a lot, Salah loses the ball a lot, and Trent loses the ball a lot. And I think one player in the attack who probably doesn't is Roberto Firmino. And he has a contract which is due to expire in the summer. So Liverpool, I don't know if they're even aware that they're doing this, but they seem to be stockpiling players who are going to
give the ball
away a lot. Yeah, I mean, if you're creating stuff, that's fine, but there's got to be an element of control there.
And that's where coaching comes in, isn't it? I suppose.
Yeah.
And that's where you'd hope that Klopp and the backroom staff are able to make him better as a footballer. One of the ones, obviously, I think that we mentioned, we'll go on to talk about XG a lot actually in our next show over on redmenplus.com. I'm sure we'll talk about it because it's the poster boy of stats, isn't it? The expected goals. How did you feel he showed up in expected goals?
Well, he shows up good to me. And when you're watching him, I think it's quite clear he's got a good ball striking ability. I think his technique when he's shooting is quite clean. He scored a few goals this season from outside the box as a result of that. But when I checked, based on the data since, I think it was 2018, from 2018-19 onwards, in the Dutch Eredivisie and in Europe, he's overperformed XG by 11.2 goals, which we will touch on more in our next episode with Darwin Núñez. But that kind of suggests that in comparison to the average, he's just very good at converting shots into goals, and he's quite clinical and maybe better at scoring from tricky angles and things like that. Obviously, it's a small sample. Well, I suppose it's not in a way. You know, it's a couple of seasons worth of data that, so I have to check how many shots he's taken, but that suggests he's good at putting the ball in the net, basically, which is something that Liverpool have suffered from a bit this season.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I looked at it compared to Mane, Jota and Diaz. He's getting more goals per 90 than both of them. He has more shots per 90 than all three of them. He's having more shots on target per 90 than all three of Mane, Jota and Luis Diaz. So, I mean, this is a guy who clearly is playing in a weaker league. So I think there needs to be some leeway given to that. You know, some websites, I know StatsBomb certainly have a formula for each league to convert them into, well, if this player is doing this in the Dutch league, you have to times it by 0.89 or whatever it is, and then you're going to get the figures for what we should see in the Premier League. So there is an element to this is going to change slightly when it comes to the Premier League, but as a side-by-side comparison, he is doing very well compared to these players. Now, is there any more things there? Because obviously the crosses into the penalty area was interesting. I thought his corners, by the way, the fact that he takes corners, you know, big in-swinging corners for the most part as well, I think is an interesting thing, because I feel, and I don't know whether you agree with this, that Kostas is our best corner taker and he's not on the pitch all the time.
Yeah.
And after that, you can get a little bit of inconsistency.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think it's interesting that despite being, I think he's about 6'2", 6'4", many people...
You've named the two things. There's two. There is 6 foot. There's 186 centimeters or 189 centimeters. And no, it's like, you know what Paul said to me the other day. He goes, it's like transfer market don't update it after they're 17 years old. Like, you don't check back to see if you've grown any bigger. Yeah. It's 6'2" or 6'4". Nice like that.
The best way I've found of judging that is just looking at how tall they are in comparison to Klopp. So when I look at Klopp, when you meet Klopp and do the whole handshake thing, is he taller or is he shorter than Klopp? And I think he's taller, so that bodes well for him, I suppose.
I like that.
But if you look at his game, as I said, he's really tall, and most people would look at that without really going into detail and think, okay, aerial threat. But he's not really. He does win a lot of aerial duels, but I think that's because he's up against fullbacks for the most part in that sense. But when it comes to scoring goals with his head, not very many at all, which is perhaps why he takes a lot of corners, a lot of set pieces. But I think that's another little interesting quirk to touch on, considering he's really tall, but he's not really an aerial presence like even Jota, who's like 5'10", and Darwin Núñez. I think he'll be a bit different to that.
One other thing I think I wanted to talk about is obviously he ranks really well in assists, doesn't he? At the moment, he's the top 1% in Europe this season in terms of assists from the left wing position. For PSV. He's a top 1% in expected assists as well. Top 2% in expected assists, and he's top 2% in key passes as well from left wingers this season in Europe's top 5 leagues. So I think when you consider those types of things, are we maybe, because I think you've got to consider the state of Liverpool Football Club at the moment, Josh, and the fact that right now our midfield isn't creative. Now, most people would say get a creative midfielder. That might solve your fucking issue there, which is absolutely fine. It's a completely valid way of doing it. Yeah. But have Liverpool gone, actually, we're not very creative from the forward 3 positions either. You know, can we get more creativity there?
Well, I think he'll help in the midfield, though, specifically in the sense of, like, if you think of Liverpool's forwards at the minute, they're all like weirdly inclined to run away from the ball, apart from Firmino. Like, Salah loves the threat in behind. Núñez is the same. Diaz maybe a little bit different, but I think he's still a threat in behind. And Jota's that man who likes the penalty box. I think Gakpo is a bit more come to feet, and I think he likes the ball to his feet. I think he likes to come a little bit deeper and receive the ball before kind of carrying it towards the opposition backline. So I think he'll give us a bit of differentiation in that sense. Maybe allow us to progress the ball a little bit differently than we have done before. But overall, as a creative spark and as a player who's going to be a danger for opponents to cater for, I think he's going to offer a lot more than what... I mean, I don't want to keep criticising him, but Oxlade-Chamberlain is... he's a bit blunt as a player when it comes to him being in an attack. He's a bit more of a... That's why he got moved back to become a central midfielder under Klopp, because it made a bit of sense, basically. Whereas if you look at someone like Gakpo, Diaz, Núñez, Jota, they're all just obsessed with actual returns and things like that. So I think getting a player in who's got that naturally attached to his game it's only a positive, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and the final one I wanted to look at, I don't know whether there's more for you, is he's in the top 1% again compared to left wingers in the top 5 European leagues in goal creating actions. So he's creating more than one goal creating action every single game at 1.05, which is bloody incredible, to be honest with you, when Mane's at 0.63 and Jota's at 0.65 and Diaz is at 0.57. For him to actually be exceeding one goal creating action per game is pretty impressive, isn't it?
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see if that suffers a decline or a boost at Liverpool, because you're surrounding them with better players, arguably a more dominant team, but then at the same time it's a stronger league and he's got more competition for places, so will he get on the pitch just as much and things like that. So it's always interesting to look at that sort of thing and think, will this player's output, will it boost or will it decline? With Núñez, it's basically doubled in terms of his shots, at least, and things like that. With Gakpo, hopefully it does the same.
Yeah, we'll look at Núñez as mentioned in a second show over on redmenplus.com. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about the formations and stuff. Right, okay, so we've got the tactics board out for this one, Josh. Quite looking forward to this, actually. We've set it up in a 4-3-3 formation. And as you can see there, we've got Alisson in goal. We've got Andy Robertson playing left-back. We've got Konate, Joel Matip and Trent Alexander-Arnold. We've got Fabinho, Thiago, Henderson. Then we've got Salah on the right-hand side. We've got Núñez up top. We've got Cody Gakpo over on the left-hand side. And I cannot say his name how people want me to say his name because it's Hakpo or something, isn't it? So I'm going to continue to say Gakpo over on that left-hand side. Now, the reason I've gone with Konate and Matip is because we know that Virgil van Dijk has an injury at the moment. So this is sort of a short-term 4-3-3 formation, not including any of the injured players. But obviously Gakpo over here on this left-hand side. What are you expecting to see, first and foremost, from his starting position as a left winger, and maybe how it would differ to somebody like a Diaz?
Well, I think in comparison to Luis Diaz and Sadio Mane in particular, who's obviously occupied that role for a few years, I think Gakpo's a little bit less inclined to dart in behind, basically. As a result of that, he's a bit more inclined to come to feet. So I think rather than constantly threatening in these spaces and behind, which I'm sure he will be instructed to do, but I think it's a bit more natural for him to come into these areas and pick up the ball. And I think in that sense, it might be a bit more beneficial for him almost, that for a couple of weeks at least, Van Dijk isn't going to occupy this spot, and it's probably going to be Konate or Joel Matip, because both of those players are a bit more inclined to play line-breaking passes through the lines, a bit more delicate, rather than Van Dijk, who likes to play the lofted passes over the fences in the direction of Mane, who's sitting in behind.
Okay, so what you're saying here is we've got Virgil van Dijk coming in here, and he likes to play the ball over the top down into this corner of the field here.
Yeah.
And for somebody like a Mane or a Diaz, they might maybe be inclined to do that. But in this instance, him coming back in would suit a Konate or a Matip to play that ball to feet.
Yeah, potentially. And I think he did play in a similar role-ish for Holland in terms of like picking up the ball in number 10 spaces quite a lot. He's a wide player, but he is quite versatile in that sense. That's one of the reasons why Liverpool bought him. But I think in that sense, he can offer Liverpool something a little bit different. And on top of that, given him his tendency to receive the ball to feet, he likes to receive it in slightly deeper areas, and he's known for kind of carrying the ball over large distances towards goal, potentially laying off to his left, to his full-back, or playing the ball inside, or potentially playing crosses, which I'm sure we're going to touch on. But he's just kind of a little bit different to what Liverpool have had the past couple of seasons there.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that, we mentioned it in the first part of the show here, let's sort of try and talk about maybe how he would sort of cross the ball in here, Josh. And, quite often you think of Ryan Giggs in the left wing, he's going to run down here and he's going to whip the ball in, back in the old days. So what is Cody Gakpo going to do here in relation to this setup? Yeah,
well, it's a really interesting element of his game. He seems to be inclined to cut inside towards the corner of the box right here. And rather than shooting, which is the tendency of a lot of wide forwards, specifically Salah and Mane was doing it for years, he tends to cross the ball in this direction, basically, to a lad who's arriving late at the back stick. It's a shame that Salah's not better in the air, but maybe the ball's dropping a bit low by that point. Or someone like a Darwin Núñez or even a Jota who's arriving here. They're kind of like really delicate.
So like, as you mentioned before, little chips in golf, but with a little bit of bend on it.
Yeah, it's like a pitching wedge or something, mate, the way he does it. And I think creating space for him is where Robertson will come in. Because if we imagine this as an opposition player right now, say that's the opposition right back, Robertson can do these underlaps when Gakpo's got the ball there, and when he does these underlaps, the opposition fullback tends to go with them, create space for Gakpo here to cut inside, and then use this space to time and space to deliver the ball around these areas, and hopefully he can get converted. But he's registered a fair few assists this season for PSV by doing exactly that. And as we've touched on in the first segment of the show, it's kind of a unconventional attacking weapon really for an inside forward to have, who's usually goal focused. You don't usually see them crosses from Salah, not usually from Mane either. And I think it's timely really, because we now have Núñez up front, 6'2" or whatever, really good in the air, and Jota, who's still to come back, who we know is good in the air. Yeah. So it's an interesting one for Liverpool to use.
Okay, I'm just going to put the players back here for a second. There's one more thing that I kind of wanted to talk about while we've got the 4-3-3 formation up. And one of the things that I spotted when sort of scouting him, as it were, is that he is actually he's clearly right-footed, but he doesn't mind the shot with his left foot at all, does he? And what I think that does, and I'm going to pull up an opposition player here, I'm going to put him on the board, and I think he looks at the defender. This is what I've got from it anyway, and he decides, you've taken the inside, so I'm absolutely fine with going down the left. Whereas I think a lot of players will run to someone and go, I know where I'm going to go, and if we both go that way, we're fucked.
Yeah.
But I think because he's equally adept at going that way or that way, he goes, all right, well, you're just going to take the inside, I'm going to take the outside, and I'm happy to cross it left-footed across the box for someone arriving in. And I think he gives us something maybe a little bit different in that situation as well. And the fact that he likes to even shoot from sort of this area of the field when he goes past his man, left-footed into the bottom corner. I think that's another interesting thing that he does. And my word, how we've been crying out for someone who can pass it across the goalkeeper into the net over the last few weeks, because we've seen Darwin miss quite a few, haven't we? Which again, we'll talk about in our second show. Specifically, Darwin Núñez is finishing from those situations. We're going to take a deep dive on that on redmenplus.com, so come and join us for that one. Anything else you want to talk about in the 4-3-3 formation?
No, just elaborating on what you've just said though, in terms of that outside-inside dynamic that he's got. I think we've seen some of the downsides attached to not having that over the past few years when it comes to Mo Salah, because obviously he tries to repeat the same movements a lot, where he kind of gets to this location and kind of cuts inside and aims for this far corner, and he's very good at doing it. He's like the closest thing I've seen to Ian Robben, I think, when it comes to doing it. Very good at doing it, and fair play for continuing to keep doing that, basically. But a lot of the time, it can be catered for, and it can be a bit predictable at times. I think Jose Mourinho has come up against him several times, tends to nullify him fairly well off the top of my head. And I think what he usually does is his direct opponent is usually right-footed when Mourinho faces them, and or they'll double up, and it's just kind of easy to snuff out. But if you think of Salah, and when Salah goes against someone like Manchester City, I've got visions of Salah going this way and putting the ball in the far corner with his right foot, if you see what I mean. And it just adds that element of unpredictability, and it's difficult for defenders to manage. And I think Gakpo, as you've just said, has naturally got that a bit more in his game. And as I said, can only benefit Liverpool. Absolutely. Okay, well, I'm going to take a little look at the 4-3-2-1 formation next. So we've moved it to the 4-2-3-1 formation now. I've got Alisson in goal, Trent Alexander-Arnold at right back, Konate, Virgil van Dijk's back in for this one, Andrew Robertson, Fabinho partners Thiago as the two midfielders, Gakpo behind, Salah from the right, Diaz from the left, and Núñez up top. Now, obviously, this is a bit more of a side, Josh, whereby I put Virgil van Dijk in, we put Luis Diaz in. This could be maybe a long-term solution, or at least not solution, but option for Liverpool Football Club, because we've seen sometimes Klopp likes to get that extra attacker on the field when things aren't going well, and we've obviously know that Gakpo's been used in this sort of position here, the number 10 role almost for the Netherlands at the World Cup. What do you like about him in there, and what do you think it could offer Liverpool? I do think he's more natural on the flanks, but I think in terms of Liverpool's squad at the minute, I actually think this system would benefit us a lot more based on what we're doing right now. It's a shame that, as you say, Luis Diaz, he's currently injured, so it might be a bit difficult to play this system every week at the minute. But when everyone's fit, I think this probably benefits Liverpool's squad more, simply because I think Darwin Núñez here, obviously he's playing in place of Roberto Firmino, who's historically operated as Liverpool's number 9. So what Firmino's done over the years is drop into this space and occupy these spaces here. he's obviously not doing that anymore when Nunes is there. Nunes is having a go, but I don't think it's
not natural.
It's not natural for him yet. I think he's more of a penalty box player. I'll finish the move for you. You do everything else in terms of constructing the move for me. So I think if Nunes is going to be the future, I think we need a 10 personally, or if we're going to play the 4-3-3, number 8, so we're going to be comfortable drifting into the 10 every now and then, or maybe even Gakpo coming across from the left. But anyway, in terms of the Gakpo operating as the 10 here, I think it would benefit Nunes. I think it would help the team. And on top of that, you've got the 2 players behind who are operating in a 2 rather than the 3. And generally, if you're operating in a 2, your movements are just generally a bit more side to side.
Yeah.
And horizontal, shuttling rate basically. Whereas if you're playing with a midfield 3, the 2 number 8s are expected to do that up and down all day.
With Thiago and Jordan Henderson as our 8s nowadays, probably don't have the legs to be able to get box to box, do they? And that means that Fabinho, for simplistic terms, has to do all of this.
Exactly, yeah.
Whereas, you're halving the work rate on Fabinho, you're halving the work rate on Thiago. Although, to be fair to Thiago, he does play a lot in this position anyway. A bit more like that Toni Kroos quarterback for Real Madrid. So I get what you're saying there. And then does that mean that we can get these lads further up the field again, like last season?
Yeah, and then you can defend with your standard box, basically. But with this as a 4, supported by the 2 fullbacks, you've got a lot of attacking potential here. It remains to be seen whether Gakpo can perform to the level we've seen him this season, which has resulted in Liverpool buying him. It remains to be seen whether he can perform to that level as a 10 every week. And I'd be surprised if he was doing that every week. I do think he's a player for the flanks. But it remains to be seen, you know what I mean? He's got that in his locker. We led to believe he's versatile and things like that, according to what Klopp said. And this system, as I said, would benefit Liverpool more. But it's just a shame that in terms of Diaz, it might have to be someone like Carvalho or Ox or someone like that playing there in the meantime if Klopp's going to do it between now and...
Well, the other thing I suppose maybe we've forgotten there is that Bobby shouldn't be out for anywhere near as long. So we could potentially have Nunes over on this left-hand side, Bobby in the 9, but playing the Jota style 9, Nunes style 9 more than the Bobby style 9, having Gakpo there, or is that a potential that you see?
I think in that sense, just because Bobby's naturally inclined to drift towards the 10 space, you could almost swap the 2 and test Gakpo as a 9. I'm not sure if he is that kind of player. He's still got that profile about him where he's adaptable and he can still be shaped.
Gakpo, Nunes, Bobby.
Exactly, yeah. That's another way of doing it. This is the perks with signing versatile players. It gives you tactical options, doesn't it? And Gakpo's certainly that. Played in multiple positions over the course of his career and seems to have a really multifunctional skill set where he can help Liverpool in many different ways. So it's going to be interesting to see what Klopp does.
Absolutely. Let's look at the last formation then, which is going to be another 4-3-3. Right, okay, so in this one, we've got the 4-3-3 formation again. We've got Alisson in goal, Trent, Konate, Virgil van Dijk, Robbo, Fabinho with Hendo and Thiago, but hopefully one of them is replaced. Salah on the right, Diaz from the left-hand side, and Gakpo as the number 9. Now, this is a weird shout, especially after our last conversation about, not really sure if he can do it. But, if Klopp wants to get back to what Liverpool were a couple of years ago, having someone who's a creative influence, I thought, in the number 9, who likes to drop into that position, because that's the 10 that he plays for the Netherlands, could be a potential option. He's a big physical lad. He might not be a good header of the ball, but that might mean that he's close control and keep the ball and move it out to the wingers and stuff. I wondered whether this is a potential option now. The big question you mentioned, as soon as we did it, there's no Darwin Núñez here, but Luis Diaz has to be in the side somewhere. And that's the big thing I think anybody watching this show right now is thinking about is, what's the future? And it might not be this 4-3-3, it might not be Gakpo in the 9, but with Diaz, Gakpo, Salah and Núñez and Diogo Jota fit, how would you play the 4-3-3, or how could you see it potentially lead? What could it lead to?
Yeah, well, there's so many different ways of doing it. Like you just mentioned, this is Diaz, but that could easily be Núñez, even though Núñez is led to believe a striker, and Gakpo is a wide player. And the reason for that is because if you look at Liverpool's 4-3-3 and how it's worked in the previous years, this has been Firmino, this has been Mane. This guy has put the ball in the net and made those penetrative runs in behind. This guy's created the space for him. And if you think of what Núñez is and what Gakpo is, Gakpo's a bit more of the type who wants the ball to feet. he wants to come deeper. That feels more Firmino to me. Núñez is more inclined to run behind, put the ball in the back of the net. That feels more Mane. So, in a weird sort of way, Gakpo could be suited to the central role, dropping into these deeper areas, with Diaz or Núñez coming in from the flanks and finishing the move. The only thing with that is I think Gakpo's got a bit of work to do in terms of kind of receiving the ball with pressure from his backside. I don't think he's anywhere near as good as Firmino at doing that yet. He's a physical lad, you know, we've mentioned that he's about 6'2", 6'4". So he's got that about him in terms of the physical edge, but in terms of his ability to build it up a bit and his ability to receive the ball under pressure, maybe he's not there yet. But I do think Gakpo, given his tendency to receive the ball to feet, is almost better suited. Well, not better suited, but maybe more of a natural at behaving like Firmino rather than Núñez, who's looked a bit square peg round hole when he starts to do the Firmino stuff. Do you know what I mean?
No, absolutely. So are there any other options there that you'd look at? I mean, the obviously other thing is, you know, the game's changing. The game's changed in terms of 5 subs. With 5 subs, it gives, I think, managers the options to refresh their lineup more regularly during games. It's obvious that it's factual, isn't it? There's literally 2 extra subs. Yeah. But does that then necessitate bigger squads to be able to keep lads fresher? Whereas in the past, Klopp always liked the small squad, didn't he, Josh? Because he knew that they were going to get the game time. With 5 subs, you can give everyone the game time, especially if you're playing, which is the aim, 60 games a season.
Yeah, well, this is the big question attached to his signing for me. You know, it's kind of an uncharacteristic move, considering Liverpool they're already well stacked on that side of the pitch, when everyone's fit at least. Not everyone is at the minute, but when everyone's fit, Gakpo's favoured position is shared by Luis Diaz and Jota, really. And if the way Jota can play across the pitch, he can basically play anywhere. He's like you know what he reminds me of? He reminds me of Ditto from Pokemon.
I don't know what that is.
Don't you know what that is? No.
I know what Pokemon is, but I don't know what a Ditto is.
Well, it's a shapeshifter,
right.
Basically. It can just assume any form. And Jota kind of reminds me of that, whereas Diaz, I see Diaz over there and kind of nowhere else, personally. Gakpo a little bit more versatile than that, but still preferring that side of the pitch. So it's one of those where you'd probably say it's a nice problem for Klopp to have. But when everybody's fit and you've got 1 game a week, he'll do well to keep everyone happy, but hopefully Liverpool are doing well enough where they've got 3 games all the time. Like we know it's the case last season, weren't it? So I don't know. Liverpool are well stacked, specifically on the left, but hopefully Gakpo is closer towards Jota than Diaz when it comes to being able to play everywhere.
Yeah, and one final thing that I forgot to mention before, if I just switch it back to the 4-2-3-1, could this be the reason we didn't sign a midfielder? Because we really need a midfielder, Jürgen. Like surely if you've signed Gakpo in the long term is to go 10, I understand it. But right now we play 3 midfielders, and I'm pretty certain we need at least 1 or 2 midfielders.
Do you know what? It's an interesting shout. It's definitely a possibility to play like this for the next couple of months. The only thing is, who plays where and who occupies the 4th spot in the attack. Usually if you're playing 4-2-3-1, it's because you've got a wealth of attackers. Yeah. Liverpool have got Salah and Núñez at the minute, and then you've got Gakpo added to that, but then the 4th option, unless Firmino becomes available, is a Carvalho or an Ox or even maybe an Elliott, or even a Curtis Jones. But you'd just rather get all your best players on the pitch, and Klopp's just got to find a way of doing that. But I suppose that would be potentially a way of addressing the midfield void where Gakpo gets more involved down these ways, and these players that are a bit more like coming side to side like this. As a result, you're not getting highlighted in terms of your just inability to cover both boxes. So
this lad starts to get more assists because the space is there for him. He's not having to do quite as much, because I think we've seen a switch a bit more to that. Haven't we, in the average positions over the recent weeks, where left back's getting more higher up the pitch than centres on, whereas it used to be a little bit more like that. So
you could even start doing a little bit of a pep, to be honest. And like when we've got the ball secured, you know, you kind of do a little bit of this, something like that, and Trent kind of tucks inside, and the same on the opposite side. But I think Robertson's a bit more of a runner, to be honest, to be doing that. But Trent to see a little bit more like Cancelo. So I don't know, it's possible. You've got options there.
Absolutely. Well, there you go. That's been the very first deep dive. Thank you very much for joining us, Josh. Absolute pleasure. Can't wait to get into more of these types of situations with you. Looking at Liverpool each and every single week. We'll be recording on a Thursday. Video will be out in the coming days from that. So yeah, if you've enjoyed it, like the video, please. Don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel. And if you want the Darwin Núñez show, we'll give you a little clip of that now.
And if you look at the best players over the past decade or so, I think Cristiano Ronaldo was his peak, averaging about 6 shots per 90. Lionel Messi the same, about 6 shots per 90. Luis Suarez, when he was at Liverpool and he exploded, 5.5 shots per 90. Cristiano Ronaldo the same at Manchester United when he scored something like 31 in a single Premier League season. Núñez is up at 5.7 per 90 at the minute. Now that probably will come down, but my take on it would be it's a matter of time. And the reason like the analytics take would be that on Núñez is because of the sheer number of shots he's getting. And you just don't, unless the shots are from 30 yards every time, which they're not, they're in the box a lot of the time from good areas, the goals should just follow without him actually changing much. And I think what I'm getting at is, rather than actually looking at the situation and thinking, right, Núñez is wasteful or Núñez needs 10 chances to score, it just kind of needs to be looked at as like a patch almost.
And you can sign up at redmenplus.com. See you there. Ciao.
Get closer to Liverpool Football Club and the amazing city of Liverpool with Redmen Plus. More content for your eyes and ears, documentaries, extra bonus Redmen shows, podcast features, interviews. Get close to the culture of Liverpool Football Club on Redmen Plus.